Chapter 6. Howling in the Dark. The sun dipped below the horizon and the bubbling sound grew even louder as the moon reached for the sky. Jacob had his attention taken when we all called for their eyes. "Look! What the hell is that?" she asked with shock, pointing behind the fountain. Jacob and Nicola were at her side in a moment. There, behind the fountain, they saw a strange, murky, liquid light of black and red, seemingly seeping up from the ground itself between the broken stones. They all watched in horror as the strange glowing liquid bubbled up from the ground, pooling itself around the fountain. The strange light grew even brighter as it climbed the fountain and fell into the basin, making the water glow an eerie dark red. Before long, the entire fountain was filled with the strange glowing liquid. Once the fountain's water had been overtaken by this strange light, the liquid began to roll and boil until it leaked over the entire fountain, coating it in a sinister glow. The light spread over the entire surface of the fountain before the bubbling oddity started reaching for the gemstone floating above it. Jacob, Niccolo, and Lial took several steps back as they watched the odd bubbling light touch the floating crystal, but then recoil with a sizzle as smoke began to rise from it. The strange liquid pooled in the top basin of the fountain before it all started forcing itself onto the crystal, entirely unhindered by the sizzling, burning touch of the gemstone beacon. The strange liquid seemed to be trying to cover the crystal, but just before it had coated it completely, the green gemstone started to shine. The light from the stone was so bright they needed to shield their eyes. "What's happening?" Jacob asked. "No clue," Niccolo replied with unease. The light subsided ever so slightly before glowing so brightly it bathed the entire clearing in bright green light. Then the light subsided as the strange bubbling red stuff was shot high into the sky, sent hurtling toward the moon like a shooting star. "Shit, we have to go back. Right now," Niccolo said as they all watched the strange black and red light continue to rise in the sky. "Let's hurry," we all agreed as the light slowed down. It wasn't another moment before it burst and fizzled away like it had the nights prior. "Right," Jacob agreed, grabbing up Cardi as Niccolo picked up Lial. They raced back across the countryside and managed to make it back to Sofia in less than a minute, though they were huffing and puffing when they re-entered the city. "Take us to Randy's, I have to check on Dawn," Lial said urgently. Niccolo was still out of breath, but he responded quickly as he set her down. "Jacob, take Lial to Dawn. I'll see what I can do to help," Niccolo said, red in the face. Jacob set Cardi down and picked up her master without hesitation as the howls of wolves rang out in several directions. Despite being out of breath, his legs weren't going to give out anytime soon, so Jacob leapt high on top of a building before leaping from rooftop to rooftop, crossing the entire city in moments. He jumped down onto the street in front of Randy's house, where they both burst in the front door. We all ran up the stairs as Jacob put a hand on his chest and doubled over to catch his breath. He was huffing and puffing so hard he gagged when something foul struck his nostrils. "Ugh, what is that smell?" he asked himself. "Dawn, honey?" she called as she pounded up the stairs. There was no response. Lial ran into her daughter's room and only spent a moment inside before running right back out. "She's not in here," she said with fright before running right down the stairs. She ran so frantically that she tripped and fell near the bottom, but Jacob recovered just in time to catch her and put her upright again. "Where else would she be?" Jacob asked quickly. "With Randy, I hope," she said grimly. They headed outside just in time to see Cardi bolting past like a lightning strike. She ran between Randy's and his neighbors' houses and was immediately out of view. Jacob and Lial just barely managed to get around the house fast enough to see Cardi dashing toward Lil Dawn, standing at the edge of the forest. She was holding a ball and backing away from something hidden in the brush. Jacob's legs moved before he could think, and he just barely heard her say, "You have beautiful eyes," in a mix of terror and wonder to the werewolf that was approaching from the trees. The wolf creature lunged just as Jacob grabbed the girl, only leaving him time to put himself in the way of harm and protect her, letting the creature at his exposed back. He covered her on his knees, but was shocked to feel a rush of wind above him as Cardi leaped at the wolf creature and knocked it down. She was just about to tear out its throat when Lial called out to her. "Cardi, pin," she commanded. The wolf stopped short of the werewolf's throat and growled at it with ferocity. The werewolf actually seemed quite frightened and whimpered like a puppy as it struggled to break free. But then, with a howl and a rush of wind, suddenly the wolf form was washed away from the person like a breeze carrying away a leaf, leaving an unconscious person pinned beneath Cardi. The wolf actually looked quite confused and surprised, immediately looking to Lial for direction. "It's okay. Come," Lial said as she approached Jacob. Finally free of his protective instinct, Jacob pulled himself away from Dawn, holding her by the arms as he looked into her little eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked her. Dawn looked like she was about to nod, but then her face slowly started puffing up as she closed her eyes tightly and started going red. Jacob was greatly concerned, but his concern quickly turned to relief as Dawn burst into tears, wailing and going to her mother for comfort. He stood up and took a deep breath, finding the relief brought a smile to his face. "Thank the gods we were in time," he remarked. We all had been comforting Dawn, but she looked to him with grave seriousness in her face. "If we had been even a few seconds later," she said, unable to finish her sentence. Jacob nodded to her. Leal gulped hard and held her daughter a little tighter before picking her up and stepping up to him. "Thank you for trying to save her. Thank you so much," Leal said, the shock of the moment still weighing heavy. "Don't mention it. If I'm honest, I think I just reacted. Sort of like what Cardi did," he said, looking to the wolf with a smirk. Cardi looked up to him, seemingly smirking back as she let her tongue hang out while she panted lightly. He put his hand out to the wolf and she immediately put her neck to his hand, letting him scratch her gently. "Why don't you guys take a second to try and calm down? I'm gonna bring this guy to the guard outpost," he said, picking up the poor man and carrying him over his shoulder. We all only responded by holding Dawn tight and burying her face in her daughter's neck. Jacob nodded to himself and headed on his way, assuming it would be best to give them some time alone. He managed to pick up another collapsed citizen on his way and was glad to bump into Niccolo, also carrying people to the outpost. "How'd it go?" Jacob asked. "Well, I managed not to injure any of them, so I'd say as well as it could have." "Is Leal keeping Dawn company?" Niccolo asked in reply as they set the victims down and propped them up against a wall. "You could say that. We had quite the scare. Dawn was outside and nearly got mauled, but Cardi managed to save her. Leal's putting herself back together, and I don't really blame her. When I saw Dawn backing away from the werewolf, my heart stopped and I just moved. I tried to save her, but Cardi beat me to it. Scared the crap out of me," he explained. Niccolo put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed it, offering a gentle smile. "Are you going to be alright?" "Yeah, I'll be fine. I'm honestly more worried about them, and also the townsfolk. This is getting more dangerous with each passing day," Jacob replied. "You're not kidding. I can't believe we've been looking for this long and it still feels like we need more information. Like everything is there in front of us, we're just missing the one piece that could let us puzzle it together," Niccolo said. "Really? I'm surprised it isn't like this most of the time," Jacob replied. "Well, I've had a couple mysteries here or there, but usually they either aren't that tough to solve or it just seems unsolvable entirely. It's kind of weird if you think about it," Niccolo answered with a shrug. "What's weird about that?" Jacob asked. "Mostly just that this one seems so difficult to solve by comparison," he said. Jacob didn't really know what to say about that, racking his brain for anything that might put the pieces together for him. Unfortunately, he was unsuccessful in finding anything of use. He spent a few minutes thinking while Niccolo made a report to the guard, but his train of thought was interrupted when he saw Leal approaching. She was still carrying a now calmed down Dawn, and Cardi was at her side as expected. She walked right up to him and had rage in her eyes. "How is everything?" she asked sharply. "Mostly the same as last night. A couple of casualties, and even more people were transformed than yesterday," Niccolo said as she approached. Jacob pursed his lips in frustration. "Where's Randy?" she asked through her teeth. Niccolo seemed surprised and looked to Jacob, but after seeing neither of them knew, they both shook their heads and shrugged. "Someone here has to know," she said before marching up to the men she'd seen her ex-husband with the night before. "Hey, where's Randy hiding?" "He left for the morgue a little bit ago," one of the men answered. The others corroborated his answer with nods of affirmation. Leal didn't even say thank you. She just turned and walked away. Jacob and Niccolo didn't have much better to do, so they followed her to the morgue. After heading inside, they spoke to a young flamboyant funeral attendant who seemed in low spirits. When asked about Randy, he told them that he had mentioned needing to make a report to the castle. With a quick thank you, they departed again, heading to the castle gate. Unfortunately, they weren't permitted inside, and the guards refused to say whether or not Randy had come or gone, stonewalling them once again. Leal was frustrated but determined and led them back to Randy's house to wait for him. They waited for somewhere near 2 hours, but Randy still hadn't returned home. Dawn was fast asleep in her mother's arm, Cardi was curled up under her feet, and Niccolo was passed out on the steps. Jacob was completely alert in the warm summer air, and Leal was drowsy but too furious to sleep. The pair talked quietly and watched the fireflies dance through the evening calm until Leal gave up. When Jacob looked up to the sky, he noticed the moon would probably be full tomorrow night. "I'm surprised he's not back yet," Leal said, breaking the silence that had lingered over them for a while now. Jacob needed to clear his throat before he was able to speak. "Yeah, it's getting late. Maybe we should head back to the inn and you can yell at him in the morning," Jacob said, bored but wide awake. "Who says I'm going to yell at him?" Leal asked. "Are you not going to?" "That's surprising. I would." leaving his little daughter all alone like that. What was he thinking? It's not just dangerous, it's stupid, he replied. Well, I might. You're right about how reckless it was. I just wanted to hear if he had a good reason or not, Leal said, looking like she was doubting herself. That's fair. If he didn't, though, you should let him have it, Jacob said. You think so? She replied, looking somewhat reassured. Definitely. Dawn was seconds from death's door tonight, and he still doesn't even know it, he said. Leal pulled Dawn a little closer and furrowed her brow. God, that pisses me off, she said through clenched teeth. It should. Leal looked him in the eyes, and he met her stare. He could tell she was seeing something in his eyes as she looked from one eye to the other. After a moment, she smiled softly and stood up. Come on, let's head back for the night, she said. Jacob nodded and got up quickly before stretching and shaking Niccolo awake. They returned to the inn and took a long rest. Jacob found it easy to sleep that night after all the excitement. When he woke up in the morning, he was well rested and felt refreshed. Jacob's eyes snapped open when Dawn approached Niccolo and said, Mr. Niccolo, I'm hungry. She sounded famished and her stomach was growling. Niccolo got right up. All right, I'll be back with something to hold you over until breakfast. Is an orange okay? He asked. She nodded happily, glad he was so accommodating. He left right away as Jacob checked their surroundings. Leal was still fast asleep. Cardi was keeping Dawn company and Niccolo was just leaving. He yawned and stretched before sitting up in bed, throwing off the blanket and hopping up with enthusiasm, ready to start his day. Dawn seemed excited to see him get up and ran right over. Did you sleep good, Mr. Jacob? She asked. It was all right. Not quite as comfortable as my bed on Olympus, but it gets the job done, he said, stifling another yawn as he stretched. How about you? I sleep like a rock, she announced with a big smile. Jacob couldn't help but smile down to her as Leal stirred from her slumber. Hey, that's funny. Just like Junia, Niccolo said with a chuckle as he re-entered. He had 4 oranges and immediately tossed one to Jacob. Jacob snatched it out of the air before looking down at Dawn and starting to peel it with a smile. Who's Junia? Dawn asked. She's my sister. I don't know her very well, but she seems pretty cool, Jacob answered before handing the little girl the peeled orange. She was so happy to take it she forgot what she was about to say next and immediately went to the table. She stood up on her tiptoes to put the orange on the table before scrambling up the chair and pulling it apart to enjoy. She seems very cool, Niccolo said with a smirk, tossing another orange to Jacob and sitting down at the table to peel one for himself. Jacob just rolled his eyes and enjoyed the fruit, not entirely sure what Niccolo was getting at. But then he remembered something. Hey, where's that box from yesterday? Jacob asked, making Niccolo freeze in place a moment before starting to poke around for it. I don't know. I'm surprised we haven't found it yet, he remarked quietly. Dawn was eyeing them, seemingly just as curious as they were. Yeah, me too. Normally it's just sitting out in the open somewhere, Jacob replied. You didn't touch it, right, Dawn? Niccolo asked. She shook her head in reply, too busy eating to answer. But then, where the heck did it go? Jacob asked, now actively looking around the room for it. We all got up after having heard everything. She asked, Do you still have those coins from yesterday? Niccolo nodded, took them from his pocket, and handed them to her. She clicked her tongue twice, and Cardi came right up to her. Cardi, search, she commanded, holding the coins out to the hound. Cardi sniffed them heavily, even turning them over in her hand with her snout to sniff the other side. But when she was done, all Cardi would do was whimper. You can't get a scent? She asked. Cardi continued to whimper. Leal took pity on the poor pooch and patted her gently before scratching her neck. It's okay, girl. Thanks for trying, she said calmly. Cardi seemed comforted by her words.